Late breaking news. At least 500 injured in a huge explosion 35 minutes ago. At least 500 people have been injured in a massive explosion at a port in the southern Iranian city of Bandar Abbas, state media is reporting. The blast took place in the Shadid Port district on Saturday morning, blowing out windows of nearby office buildings and causing the roof of at least one building to collapse. Could that be a false flag? We know what's going down today. We got the Pope's internment, or whatever you want to call it.
In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, a small, simple satellite. But its impact was anything but small. It was a wake-up call that echoed around the world. For America, it wasn't just about a satellite. It was about what it represented, that someone else might lead the future. That spark ignited the space race and reshaped the world as we know it. Now fast forward to today. China has just released their AI model, DeepSeek. It's groundbreaking, powerful, and for many, a wake-up call. Yesterday, Donald Trump even praised the achievement, calling it a warning shot for America, and urging us to step up, just like we did after Sputnik. But here's where it gets interesting. DeepSeek may not just reshape the competition between nations. It could fundamentally change how power and innovation work in the world. AI has long been the playground of the elite, tech giants, governments, and billionaires controlling the tools while the rest of us watch from the sidelines. But what if this changes that? What if DeepSeek proves that the barriers to entry are crumbling, that it doesn't take billions or a tech monopoly to innovate? Imagine what could happen if small businesses, startups, even individuals suddenly had access to this kind of power. This might not just be a technological breakthrough. It could be a paradigm shift, a moment where control slips from the hands of the few and into the hands of the many, where innovation comes from 1,000 points of light, not a handful of overlords.
Ready? Watch.
Something else people don't know is that starting in the mid-1980s, there was a judge, a federal district court judge in New Jersey, who entered a consent decree that Republicans could not be poll watchers. So from mid-80s until 2020, Republicans were not allowed to be poll watchers on these national elections. And what happened was that judge eventually died, and the Democrats, the DNC, they had to go get that injunction renewed every 5 or 8 years, something along those lines. And when that judge died, he was replaced by an Obama judge. And they went back to that judge and they said, we want this consent decree in place, making it so Republicans cannot be poll watchers and cannot be a part of this process. And he said, what in the heck are you talking about? This is absolutely so unconstitutional. And he refused to renew that consent decree. He refused to renew that injunction. So 2020 was one of the first years that we had professional Republican poll watchers in these elections to see what was going on in Atlanta, in Detroit, in Milwaukee, in Philadelphia. It was the first time we were able to really see what was going on in these polling places. And what that tells me is that probably a lot of these shenanigans have been going on for a long, long time, but there were no Republicans there to report on it.
2 of the Constitution states that the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. In other words, it is the president that defines the executive branch. When you read this language, it says that no court may take over that role. No court may define or limit the scope of the duties of an official of the executive office of the president, the people who work in the executive office. I think that what your amendment does is a violation of separation of powers, and it's a violation of Article 2 of the Constitution.
The gentlelady yield?
Yes, I will.
It's always good when the constitutionalist specialist comes in. It helps us all. So what you're saying is that the bill codifies Article 2 for purposes of the court being reminded and instructed of their limitations, and the amendment would undo that.
That's exactly right, because then it would imply that a federal court could in fact define or limit the scope of the duties of those individuals who work within the executive office of the president, and that is not a federal court's role. That is for, under Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, that power is vested in a president of the United States of America.
Could the gentlelady further yield for another question?
Yes.
Your understanding is, with the current president, or the last one, or the next one, if we don't do something like this, realistically, the chief executive, president, would continue to have to answer a myriad of claims in up to not just 50 states, but multiple places in 50 states. And if that tactic was used, even more so than it may have been used in the past, that you would have a president having to use non-official funds to answer a series of cases alleged not to be that way. Is that true?
That's the way that I read this, and I think that it's very clear, especially starting in 2017 when President Trump was sworn in the first time, that the courts have been used for nefarious purposes on a variety of issues. In fact, yesterday we had a hearing in our constitutional subcommittee about lawfare and how lawfare had been weaponized against President Trump, both while he was president as well as after his presidency. So again, I guess that I'm very skeptical of the idea that people are not willing to use lawfare to go after a current or former president. We've seen it over the last 9 years in many different instances. But the president is the one who gets to define the limit and scope of the duties of the personnel within his office. That is very clear from Article 2 of the Constitution.
Trump just approved an unprecedented executive order, $7 trillion directly into the Social Security system, from pensions to Medicare to disability benefits. This isn't fine-tuning. This is rebuilding. Starting May 1, 2025, tens of millions of Americans will see pensions rising to an all-time high each month. Full government subsidization of healthcare expenses for people over age 65. Priority access to universal coverage programs for veterans.
Pete Higgs's chief of staff has ousted in the latest sacking at the Pentagon. Washington says Joe Casper is out as defense secretary. Pete Higgs's chief of staff, the fourth top official to be fired or reassigned in the last week amid political turmoil at the Pentagon. Susan Rice is no longer in the DoD House. You are fired. Pete Higgs has ended the service of all committee members on DoD advisory roles. The Pentagon has stated changes were needed to align with the new strategic goals. If you recall from what I just read you a little while ago, a lot of these people were listed in that naming of the who's related to who. Susan Rice.
Looks as if they're in danger. They get out and head down this tube, specially insulated against fire, and zigzagging down not to some point out and away from the rocket, but to an escape room exactly where you'd think it shouldn't be. Three and a half minutes after they get the warning in the capsule, the crew could be down here in the blast escape room via that 200-foot escape tube, 40 feet below the base of the rocket. They find themselves in a totally rubber room, walls and floors, and they head for safety through a 6-inch steel door. Once they're behind that door, it doesn't matter what comes down this tube behind them.
In 1986, the shuttle Challenger exploded about 74 seconds after takeoff, killing all 7 astronauts inside. Or did it? It turns out that 6 of the 7 are still alive and kicking today. Ellison Onizuka claims to be his identical twin brother, Claude. The Challenger pilot, Mickey Smith, hasn't even bothered changing his name. He's now Professor Michael J. Smith of University of Wisconsin. Now, Krista McAuliffe was a bit of a sneaky one. She was the Challenger payload specialist, quite famous for being a teacher. It turns out, during her astronaut days, she was using her middle name, Krista, and now she goes by her first name, Sharon. and she's a Syracuse law professor. The Challenger commander, Francis Richard Scobie, is now Dick Scobie, which sounds like a rather unpleasant disease, CEO of Housing Trees Limited. Judith Resnick, the Challenger mission specialist, again hasn't even bothered changing her name. She's a professor at Yale Law. And finally, Ronald McNair, another Challenger mission specialist, claims to be his identical twin brother, Carl McNair. What are the odds?
A little fun fact. In 1978, I worked in a steel mill. I was getting paid between $16 and $18 an hour in a steel mill, okay? My house payment was $125 a month. I was doing well. Then we started not taxing or not putting tariffs on China steel coming in from China and other countries. And they were supplementing their industry, and they took our steel industry away from us, okay? And so I lost my job. They shut the mill down. And then I had to go figure it out. At the time, I was married with 3 kids. And this was in the 80s, early 80s. And I had to figure it out. I couldn't get a job that was going to pay sufficient to be able to survive. So I had to create my own businesses. And I've done that ever since. But it was the taking of the steel mills from this country and all these others that they've taken, the auto industry and everything else, that's killed our economy. Now, you start making it a fair playing field, is what Mr. Trump is doing, President Trump is doing, those jobs will come back. People will start making money. And you say, oh, well, now we're not going to get cheap products. No, we're not going to get cheap products. But all the money that we're paying those countries for those cheap products will stay in this country. And we will start manufacturing, and we will have those jobs that pay good again. You'll see.
When you finally realize that the prices of things aren't really going up, but the value of your currency is going down, you'll see the world a little bit differently.